The pounding on our front door shook the entire frame like a battering ram. My daughter dropped her juice cup, eyes wide with fear, while my son scrambled to my side, clutching my arm like a lifeline. I froze, every instinct screaming at me that this was no ordinary neighborly visit. Through the glass panel, I could see them, two heavy-set men in cheap black jackets, fists ready, with smug smirks that reeked of entitlement. And standing just behind them on the walkway, arms folded, lips curled into that awful smirk, was Karen, the HOA queen herself. Her presence was like acid in the air, bloated with power, arrogance dripping off every inch of her round face. She wasn't here to talk. She was here to show us who owned the block, or at least who thought she did. "Open this door," one of the men shouted, slamming his fist again. My wife, Claire, stepped into the room. Calm, steady, almost too quiet for the chaos vibrating outside. She had changed since her years of service, hair longer now, eyes softer with motherhood, but there was something unshakable about her presence. And though the kids only saw their mother, I knew who she truly was beneath it all. A Green Beret sniper, a warrior trained in patience, precision, and devastating retaliation. And right now, that warrior was waking up. Karen's voice cut through the door like a buzzsaw. "You're in violation of HOA rules. We voted to evict you. These men are authorized to remove you immediately." Her shrill tone rang with triumph, as though she'd already won. "Eviction? We own this house outright. Paid for in blood, sweat, and years of saving." There was no legal basis, no court order, just Karen's fabricated authority, swollen with her own self-importance. Claire's hand brushed mine lightly. "A signal. Stay calm. Let me handle this," she whispered. There was no tremor in her voice, no fear, only a cold steadiness that made me shiver more than the pounding fists outside. She opened the door herself, slowly, deliberately, like a predator stepping into the open while prey thought it was closing in. The enforcers lunged forward, one grabbing at the doorframe, the other trying to shoulder past her. But Claire didn't flinch. Her voice sliced through their aggression like a rifle shot. "Step back. You don't have the right to be here." The men hesitated, surprised by her composure, glancing back at Karen for instruction. Karen puffed up her chest, jabbing a finger in the air. "Do it. Drag them out. That's an order." That's when it happened. One enforcer reached out, grabbing at Claire's arm. In a blink, she twisted his wrist, pulling him forward so fast his knees buckled. With her other hand, she slammed the door into the second man's shoulder, knocking him off balance. The first let out a howl as his body hit the porch rail, collapsing to the ground like a rag doll. Gasps erupted from neighbors who had gathered quietly across the street, phones out, recording every second. Karen shrieked like a banshee, stomping forward, her voice cracking with panic. Assault. She attacked them. Call the police. But the irony was thick enough to choke on. She had sent her thugs to assault us, to throw our family onto the street without a shred of legality. And now, caught on camera, she was spinning lies like a spider caught in its own web. Then came the twist. A familiar voice rose from the crowd, commanding and sharp. "Karen, shut your mouth before you bury yourself further." Everyone turned. There he was, Colonel James Mercer, Claire's former commanding officer, standing tall with arms crossed at the edge of the lawn. He had moved into the neighborhood quietly just a month ago, something Karen clearly hadn't factored into her schemes. He stepped forward, his presence alone silencing even the children's nervous whispers. "I know this woman," he said, pointing at Claire. "She served with me. She is a decorated Green Beret sniper. If you think for 1 second you can rewrite the law in this cul-de-sac, you've just declared war on the wrong family." The weight of his words hung in the air. The enforcers groaned on the ground, one clutching his arm, the other struggling to breathe through the pain in his ribs. Neighbors edged closer, emboldened now, murmuring about lawsuits, about pressing charges, about finally standing up to Karen's reign of terror. Karen, still red-faced and trembling with fury, jabbed her finger toward Claire again. "You'll regret this. I'll sue you. I'll ruin you." But her threats sounded empty now, her voice quivering with desperation rather than command. Claire simply stared at her, silent and steady, her sniper's eyes boring into Karen's bloated arrogance until the woman faltered, her words stumbling into nothingness. The sheriff's cruiser pulled up just then, lights cutting across the scene. Neighbors rushed to the officers, phones out, offering their footage. Every angle told the same story: two enforcers sent by Karen to commit an illegal eviction, caught in the act, and dismantled in seconds by a woman who had defended this country with honor. The flashing red and blue lights painted our house in the colors of justice. But the real battle wasn't finished yet. Karen's shrill voice tried to pierce through the chaos as the sheriff's deputies stepped onto the lawn. "Arrest her. Arrest them both. They attacked my officers." Her words sounded thin now, brittle and desperate, her authority crumbling like old plaster. The deputies didn't move toward us. Instead, they turned to the crowd of neighbors who were already thrusting their phones forward. Videos played over and over, each one showing the same truth from different angles. Karen's enforcers shoving their way onto our property, grabbing at my wife, and Claire dismantling them in 3 precise, controlled moves. The deputies' faces hardened as they watched. One of them finally turned to Karen. "Ma'am, these men are not officers. They're hired muscle. And what we see here looks a lot like criminal trespass and assault." The words landed like a hammer. Karen's face went from crimson to pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping on dry land. "No, you don't understand. I have authority. I run this neighborhood." But the deputy cut her off, voice sharp. "You don't run the law." Claire stepped forward, her cheek bruised from where the enforcer's hand had first struck her, but her eyes steady as steel. "These men tried to lay hands on my children. That's why they're on the ground." She didn't need to raise her voice. The weight of her calm authority spoke louder than Karen's entire tirade. That was when the second twist dropped like a bombshell. Colonel Mercer, who had been quietly watching, pulled something from his jacket, a leather folder with an official seal. He flipped it open for the deputies. "Gentlemen, I'm also on contract with the Department of Defense as a security liaison. I'll be filing a formal report about an HOA using intimidation tactics against a combat veteran's family." The deputies' eyes widened. Everyone knew what that meant. This wasn't just petty neighborhood politics anymore. Federal eyes would be on this. Karen stumbled backward, her bulk shaking, sweat dripping down her temple. No, you can't do this to me." Two was protecting the community. But her voice cracked into a whine. The neighbors who had once been silent out of fear now shouted back. One woman yelled, "Protecting us? You sent thugs to beat a mom in front of her kids." Another man shouted, "We've had enough of you, Karen." Their voices merged into a chorus of outrage, raw and unfiltered, the sound of a community finally waking up. The deputies placed the enforcers in cuffs first, dragging them toward the cruisers as they spat weak protests. Then they turned to Karen. The sight of her arms being forced behind her back was surreal. She tried to resist, screaming about lawsuits, about how she would destroy us all in court, but her words were drowned out by the collective roar of neighbors filming every second. The woman who had ruled through intimidation for years was now reduced to nothing more than another criminal in handcuffs. The court hearings came fast and furious. Headlines splashed across local news. HOA president arrested after sending thugs to evict veteran's family. Videos went viral, sparking national outrage. Talk shows debated the dangers of unchecked HOA power. Veterans' rights groups called for reform, and even late-night hosts cracked jokes about HOA Karen. The spotlight was blinding, and Karen hated every second of it. Her enforcers were charged with assault, trespassing, and attempted child endangerment. Karen herself faced conspiracy, abuse of authority, and fraud once the investigation revealed she had been embezzling HOA funds for years. The board collapsed almost overnight, members resigning in shame, their empire of fines and fabricated bylaws dissolving under the weight of exposure. For Claire, the fight didn't end in the courtroom. She became something larger than even I expected. Veterans organizations reached out, inviting her to speak about resilience, about courage, about standing tall against bullies. She stood on stages with her quiet strength, telling the story not for glory but for truth. "It's not about being a soldier," she told a packed crowd once. "It's about never letting fear dictate your family's future." Our neighbors changed, too. The cul-de-sac that had once felt like a prison under Karen's watch became a community again. People gathered on porches, kids played without looking over their shoulders. Laughter replaced the hush of paranoia. For the first time in years, it felt like home. And Karen? She tried one last stunt. From her jail cell, she wrote a rambling letter claiming she was the real victim, that we had staged everything to humiliate her. But no one listened anymore. She had burned every bridge, poisoned every bond, and when the sentencing came, she stood alone. The judge's gavel came down hard. 5 years in state prison, restitution for stolen funds, and a lifetime ban from serving on any board of governance again. Her reign was over. One night, months later, I found Claire sitting on the porch, her rifle disassembled on the table, cleaning it with the same methodical care she had learned years ago. She looked up at me and smiled softly. Funny, isn't it? I thought I left this part of me behind. Turns out, it's what saved us. I sat beside her, watching the kids play in the yard, and realized she wasn't just talking about the rifle. She was talking about courage, about vigilance, about refusing to bow to tyranny no matter how small or how close to home it comes. Karen thought she could bully us into silence. Instead, she exposed herself for who she truly was. And though my wife's hands will always carry the precision of a sniper, her greatest weapon that day wasn't her training, it was her refusal to let fear rule our lives. So I leave this question with you, the reader. When power is abused and justice stands on the line, do you stay silent or do you fight back? Was Claire right to unleash her training to protect our family? Or should she have stood down and trusted the system that almost failed us? Tell me, where do you stand when the knock on your door turns into a battle cry?